When my father slapped me across the face in my own condo, it wasn't the pain that stunned me, it was the familiarity. The same white flash from when I was 12, the same message I wasn't allowed to say no. But this time, the stakes were different. My parents had shown up with suitcases claiming they'd lost everything, while the truth, nearly $1 million missing a forged signature and a house secretly bought for my brother, sat like a loaded trap beneath their lies. And as my cheek burned, I realized the slap wasn't the beginning. It was the confirmation. Something much darker was already in motion. Before I go any further, tell me where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family, because no one expects the people who raised them to become the ones who break them. Now, let me take you back to the moment everything began to unravel, long before the slap, long before the lies finally spilled open. I grew up in a house where silence wasn't peaceful, it was strategic. The Lane household revolved around Kyle from the moment he could walk. Even the air shifted when he entered a room, like the walls leaned toward him, waiting for whatever story crisis or praise he was about to demand. I learned early that the safest place was the background, quiet, helpful, invisible enough not to cause problems, but present enough to clean up after them. One of the clearest memories I have is from when I was 12. It was a late summer afternoon, the kind where the heat sticks to your skin even indoors. I'd come home from school and decided to cook scrambled eggs, determined to do something on my own for once. The burner clicked twice, flared to life, and for the first time that day, I felt proud of myself. Then my father walked in. "I can do it myself," I said softly, not disrespectfully, just wanting a sliver of independence. His hand came down before the sentence even finished. No warning, no raised voice, just a single slap that stunned my body into understanding the rule independence wasn't allowed if it made him feel unnecessary. What stuck with me wasn't the sting, it was the look afterward, the way he waited for me to fold into submission. And I did. Because at 12, what else was I supposed to do? My mother called me steady like it was a virtue. "Aubrey doesn't need much," she'd tell relatives, patting my shoulder dismissively while serving Kyle an extra scoop of mashed potatoes. Steady meant easy. Easy meant overlooked. Overlooked meant forgotten. By middle school, I understood my role. When I walked through the door holding a district math certificate with a gold star taped in the corner, I found my parents cheering loudly for Kyle making the basketball team. My mother waved me over. "Come take a picture with your brother." No one asked what I was holding. I slipped the certificate into my backpack before the edges curled. In high school, the gap widened. Kyle broke curfew, crashed my dad's truck into a mailbox, and somehow walked away with a new set of keys a month later. I broke my laptop trying to finish a scholarship essay. Kyle tripped over the cord and sent it crashing to the floor, and I got blamed for leaving things in the way. I apologized. Kyle didn't. That was the rhythm of our home. When I got into a competitive data science program, my parents congratulated me with tired smiles. 2 weeks later, they quietly used most of my educational savings to bail Kyle out of the first startup failure he ever created. "He needs support," Dad said. "You'll figure it out," Mom added. And I did, working tutoring shifts, late-night call center hours, and scraping together enough to cover books and rent. Every time my bank balance broke into double digits, I felt like I was winning a war no one knew I was fighting. Holidays were a yearly reminder of where I stood. One Christmas, Kyle unwrapped a new console designer jacket and a weekend trip to Colorado. I opened a lavender-scented candle. "You like simple things," Mom said, as if she knew anything about the things I liked. By the time I moved to Chicago at 23, I wasn't running toward a career, I was running away from the version of myself that existed only to make other people's lives easier. My condo became the first space in my life untouched by my family's gravity. Quiet, controlled, mine. What I didn't know then was that everything I had built to escape them would eventually become the place they tried hardest to claim. My first year in Chicago felt like stepping into oxygen after years of breathing through a straw. No expectations, no slammed doors, no walking on eggshells around my father's temper or my mother's fragile emotions. Just the hum of the city below and the steady rhythm of my own life, finally under my control. I built my condo piece by piece, the way some people build a sanctuary. Soft cream walls, warm lighting that pooled onto the hardwood like honey. A single plant near the window that caught the morning sun. Everything had a place. Everything was intentional. Everything was mine. Numbers became my language. Data made sense in ways people never had, clean, predictable, honest. I'd sit at the window before sunrise, wrapped in a gray sweater, watching the sky blush from black to blue while spreadsheets glowed on my screen. Patterns told stories, real stories, not the kind bent and stretched by guilt or favoritism. My parents treated my independence like a phase I'd eventually grow out of. "You'll come back home someday," my mother would say on the phone. "People need their families." But what she meant was, "We need you." Kyle's life was a carousel of new ideas, new failures, and new rescues that always came at a cost to someone else. One Thanksgiving at Grandma Rose's, that truth sharpened into something I couldn't ignore anymore. I'd spent all night making a pumpkin pie from scratch, the kitchen warm with cinnamon and nutmeg. Kyle arrived an hour late, carrying a cheap store-bought pie still in the plastic container. Naturally, my parents swooned over his. "Look at Kyle providing for the family," my mother said. I stared at my carefully made pie, its crust golden and fragrant, and felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the knowledge that effort meant nothing if your name wasn't Kyle. Grandma Rose noticed. She always noticed. Under the glow of her chandelier, she leaned toward me and whispered, "You don't owe them your silence, darling." Her voice was soft, but something in it cracked open a part of me I'd kept locked up for decades. When I turned 31, something shifted. Not a dramatic break, just a quiet internal click. I had a good job stability and a home that felt like an extension of who I was becoming. I thought I'd finally outrun the past, that I'd carved enough space between me and the old wounds to keep them from reaching me again. But old wounds don't stay buried. They wait. I saw it in little moments. The way Kyle bragged on social media about building a business empire, while our parents liked every post, as if each one was gospel truth. The way my mother called to vent about his struggles but never once asked how I was really doing. The way my father only contacted me when something needed fixing, tech help, bills, paperwork. Still, I kept my distance. I kept my peace. I kept my sanctuary intact. Until the night the doorbell rang, 3 frantic chimes slicing through the quiet. Until I opened the door to see my parents standing there, faces drawn tight, suitcases stacked behind them like they'd just escaped a disaster. Until they told me they lost the house. Until something deep inside me whispered that the story didn't add up. That night wasn't just the beginning of chaos. It was the beginning of truth. I can still hear that doorbell, 3 sharp, uneven chimes that didn't sound accidental. It was late, the city outside wrapped in that heavy Chicago quiet where even traffic noise feels distant. I just slipped off my heels, letting the day fall away, when the sound came again. Urgent, impatient, wrong. When I opened the door, my parents stood there like people who had run out of places to hide. My mother's eyes were glossy, her hands gripping the handle of a suitcase that looked far too full. My father didn't wait to be invited in. He brushed past me, dragging another suitcase over the threshold like he already owned the right. "We lost the house," my mother whispered, voice trembling just enough to seem believable. But something about the way she avoided my eyes told me the story wasn't clean. Still, I stepped aside. Reflex, muscle memory from a childhood of making myself small so others could take up all the room they wanted. That first night, they settled in like tenants who'd signed a lease. My father claimed the couch, flipping through channels with the entitlement of someone in his own living room. My mother moved through my kitchen as if cataloging everything she planned to fix. "Your spices are all over the place," she murmured, rearranging jars I'd intentionally organized. It took less than 24 hours for the rhythm of my home to shift. The silence I cherished, the steady, warm quiet, began to thin around the edges. By the next morning, it wasn't just the silence that felt off. It was the way my mother carried a box into my living room, porcelain figurines, wrapped in old dish towels, relics from my childhood home. Without asking, she cleared my shelves and replaced my minimalist decor with her fragile little antiques. "There," she said with a smile. "Doesn't that feel warmer?" Warmer wasn't the word. Crowded, claimed, intruded. Those were closer. Then came my father's list of demands. "What's the Wi-Fi password? Where's the garage fob? You got space in your storage locker?" Each question landed like a shovel of dirt thrown onto a grave, burying my boundaries inch by inch. By day 2, the building concierge called. Her tone was polite but firm. "Ms. Lane, your guests have exceeded the 48-hour limit. We'll need them registered if they're staying longer." Her subtext was clear. "Your parents are already causing issues." I thanked her, promised I'd handle it, and hung up with a knot tightening in my stomach. When I raised the topic later, my mother brushed it off. "Aubrey, that's for strangers, not family." My father added, "Stop worrying, we aren't going anywhere." They said it casually like it was nothing, but to me it was everything. That same evening I found a black trash bag by my doorway. Inside were several items from my living room, my throw blanket, a vase, 2 art prints I'd bought from a local gallery. A note sat neatly on top in my mother's handwriting. "These didn't match the space anymore. I saved the ones that suit you. Suit me." She didn't know what suited me. She'd never asked. I swallowed the anger, but it sat in my throat like a stone. Then came the crack that widened everything. An email from a mortgage company addressed to Aubrey L. Secondary contact on joint housing documents. Joint housing documents. I'd never signed. My hands went cold. My breath thinned. I reread it 3 times, trying to make the words bend into something harmless. They didn't. They only grew sharper. I forwarded it to Ethan and wrote, "Tell me this isn't real." He replied instantly, "Call me, now." That was when I knew the story my parents brought into my home wasn't the one I was living in, and the truth hiding beneath it was much, much uglier. I stepped onto the balcony before calling Ethan, letting the bite of the October wind keep me steady. When he answered, his voice carried a weight I'd never heard from him before. Controlled, careful, like he was choosing each word with tweezers. "Aubrey, your parents didn't lose their house." My breath caught against the cold air. "What do you mean they sold it voluntarily? No foreclosure, no bank pressure. They took a cash offer." My fingers tightened around the phone. "And the money," I whispered. A pause, too long to be anything but bad news. It went directly toward a property under Kyle's name, just under $1 million. The city noise seemed to drop away. My parents hadn't come to me broken. They'd come empty-handed because they gave everything to the one person who never learned how to hold anything together. But Ethan wasn't done. There's something else. Richard signed a financial power of attorney last year. My stomach twisted. And someone's been using it. Your dad says he hasn't. The balcony railing felt suddenly unsteady under my palm. Someone who always had access. Someone who never faced consequences. Kyle. When I walked back inside, my parents were in the kitchen. My mother stirring soup on my stove. My father fixing a cabinet hinge like he was preparing the space for a long-term stay. They looked comfortable, at ease, settled. As if this was a homecoming, not an intrusion. A chilling clarity washed over me. They weren't confused. They weren't overwhelmed. They were staying. That night I couldn't sleep. Their footsteps light, chatter, the hum of the guest room lamp, they all scraped against my nerves. My condo didn't sound like mine anymore. On the fourth morning I woke to the sound of furniture shifting. My father was dragging my coffee table 2 feet to the right. Better flow, he said without glancing at me. Put it back, I replied. He smirked, slow and dismissive. This isn't a museum, Aubrey. It's my living room, he shrugged. For now. Those 2 words felt like a cold hand closing around my throat. Later, while I was heating leftovers, Kyle FaceTimed me again. His smug grin filled my screen, the pristine kitchen of his new home glowing behind him. So Mom and Dad settling in, he asked. The room seemed to tilt. Why would you assume they're staying with me long term? He shrugged. Well, they said you'd take care of them until they got back on their feet. You always do. Then he added without irony. Besides, I've got a lot going on. They need stability. Stability, the thing no one ever offered me but always expected from me. Before I could respond, the concierge called again. Ms. Lane, she said, voice firmer. This time your guests still aren't registered. Mr. Briggs asked me to remind you. Mason Briggs, the building owner, never involved himself in anything small. The fact that he was tracking this situation made something inside me shift. Why was he watching? Why was he concerned? Had my parents already caused more issues than I knew? When they returned from an evening walk, I tried again. You need to register with the building if you're staying longer. My mother sighed dramatically. Aubrey, don't be so rigid. We're family. That's exactly why it shouldn't matter, my father snapped. We're your parents, and this is my home, I replied calmly. Not your fallback plan. His eyes hardened. You're fine. You've always been fine. The words hit me like a slap even before the real one came later. A lifetime boiled down to a single accusation. Because you survived, we owe you nothing. But the truth was simpler, colder, more painful. They didn't plan to leave. They saw my home as theirs, my stability as theirs, my life as theirs. And as I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, while their soft voices drifted down the hallway, I realized something terrifying. Tomorrow would break something open. A boundary, a pattern, a family. One more sunrise and everything would collapse. The morning everything snapped. Chicago looked bruised. The sky was a dull swollen gray, heavy enough to press against the windows. I woke before my alarm again, heart pounding with that quiet certain dread you feel when your life is about to pivot somewhere you can't undo. The condo was too still. Not my peaceful stillness, this one was dense, suffocating like the air was holding its breath. When I stepped into the kitchen, my mother was already there flipping pancakes on my skillet, as if she'd lived here for years. The same soft hum she used when I was 12 drifted through the room, and something inside me recoiled. My father sat at the counter scrolling through his phone, claiming space that didn't belong to him. He didn't even look up when he spoke. We need to talk about the timeline. My fingers tightened around my coffee mug. Timeline for what? For staying here, he said finally, lifting his gaze. We'll need more than a few days, maybe a few months. My chest pulled tight. No. You need to start finding another place today. The spatula paused midair. My mother's voice wavered with manufactured hurt. Aubrey, we just need time. My father set his phone down, his jaw flexing. We're your parents. Where the hell else should we go? Anywhere but here, I said. My voice didn't rise. It sharpened. You sold your house. You gave Kyle everything. You made choices. I'm not your safety net. The room froze. Something charged crackled between us. He stood slowly pushing the bar stool back with a scraping sound that made my skin tighten. He walked toward me with that same quiet menace I remembered from childhood, the kind that didn't need yelling. You think this condo makes you too good for us, he said. Don't forget this place will belong to the family someday. Everything balances out. It hit me like ice. They didn't just want temporary shelter. They believed they had a claim to my life. No, I said. It won't. And you're leaving today. His voice dropped. Say it again. I held his stare. You need to leave. The slap landed before the last word fully left my mouth. A violent searing crack across my face, bright white flash, nauseating tilt of the room, that old 12-year-old pain roaring back. My mother gasped but didn't move. She never moved. I straightened slowly, the sting rippling through my cheek, my breath trembling, but my spine locked in place. And then something inside me clicked, clean, sharp, irreversible. I reached for my phone. My father's eyes widened. Aubrey, don't. But I dialed anyway. When the dispatcher answered, my voice was steady. Yes, I need officers at my address. I have 2 people refusing to leave my home. A knock hit the open door. Mr. Preston. My neighbor stood there blinking. Everything all right? No, I said. But it will be. Then another figure stepped into view. Mason Briggs, the building owner, flanked by security. Ms. Lane reported unregistered long-term guests yesterday, he said coolly. We're here to enforce building policy. My mother paled. We weren't. Mason cut in. Security footage shows you following a delivery driver through a locked door. That's a violation. My father's entire face drained. Police arrived minutes later, crisp uniforms clipped commands. Gather your belongings. No, you cannot stay. Yes, she's the owner. I watched them pack. Watched them roll their suitcases out of my home. Watched my father look back with disbelief like the world had just shifted beneath him. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The door closed behind them with a clean, decisive click. When the door finally shut, the silence in my condo felt like a reset. Not peaceful, just honest. The kind of silence that arrives after a storm clears the air. My cheek still burned, but the heat no longer felt humiliating. It felt clarifying. I moved through the condo quietly, putting everything back where it belonged. My shelves, my blankets, my furniture. Each object returning to its place felt like reclaiming square inches of my life. No dramatics, just order. My order. By the time the sun dipped behind the skyline, the space looked like me again. 2 days later, Ethan called. Aubrey, he said, voice tight. I finished digging. I sat down. Tell me. The power of attorney your father signed. He didn't use it. Kyle did. He forged your father's signature on 2 small loans, and someone tried adding your name as a secondary guarantor on a third. My chest went cold. So the mortgage email. Exactly. Someone planned to attach you to something you never agreed to. The last thread of denial snapped. I drove to Grandma Rose's that weekend. She opened the door before I knocked twice, like she felt the truth coming. Inside, my parents sat quietly, my father stiff, my mother wringing her hands. Kyle stood by the window, pale and restless. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just laid out the facts, clean, simple, undeniable. The sale, the money, the forged signatures, the attempted attachment of my name. Kyle's face collapsed first. My father's followed, anger melting into something like fear. My mother didn't say a word. When I finished, the room stayed silent for a long, heavy beat. I won't carry this, I said. Not again. No one argued. I walked out into the cold October air, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: alignment. Not victory, not revenge, just alignment between who I was and what I was finally willing to protect. They thought the slap, the lies, the manipulation had pushed me to the edge. They had no idea they'd given me the one thing they never meant to leverage: clarity and a clean break. If any part of this story felt familiar, if you've ever been the steady one, the quiet one, the one expected to absorb everyone else's damage, then you already know how heavy that role can become. And you know how powerful it feels to finally choose yourself instead. So if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit subscribe. There's more truth ahead, more healing, and more lessons I had to learn the hard way. This story isn't over.